Good afternoon. My name is Govind Pandey. I am a student from the PGP 1618 batch and I'm making this video as an assignment submission for the Indian Economy and Policy subject. Now, my topic of discussion today is going to be the political requirements, the political clout that was needed to ensure that the steps that needed to be taken for the BOP crisis of 1991 were taken. That the 1991 reforms marked a major watershed in India's economic history is surely beyond argument. No waiting list for cars or scooters, no special licenses for securing foreign exchange for studying abroad, no gold smuggling, and no more the dread of the customs officer at airports with long queues that took hours to be cleared as each case was opened and rummaged to look for the banned item. It would have been simply inconceivable prior to 1991 that 10 million Indians would voluntarily give up the subsidy on cooking gas. The Indian reality has changed and life has become less Kafkaesque. And thankfully, scarcities are no longer the driver of human endeavor in present day India as it was prior to 1991. One must acknowledge the paradigm shift that was initiated in 1991 and which, 25 short years later, has resulted in a post reform generation that is perhaps totally oblivious to the days when one had to wait for 3 to 5 years to buy a Vespa or 10 years to get hold of a Padmini. The credit for this must be given to P.V. Narasimha Rao, who was the Prime Minister heading a minority government after the horrendous assassination of Rajiv Gandhi in May 1991, was able to establish the necessary political coalitions in support of the reforms. Now, Rao was successful in putting across to his political opponents and to the people at large that India was faced not only with an unprecedented economic crisis, but also a potentially severe political crisis in case the population did not come together as one in supporting the reforms. His principal secretary, A.N. Varma, marshaled a highly skeptical bureaucracy to support the effort. This unity of purpose among the political class and the senior bureaucracy provided the necessary condition for the Rao government to successfully reverse the 3 decades of steadily rising state intervention in all aspects of economic activity that expanded the scope of state capitalism, central planning, and bureaucratic over-regulation. Therein lies a lesson for the present government. In a country as diverse as India, excuse me, leaderships of ruling parties will have to constantly build coalitions both within and outside the parliament if it is serious about implementing the critically necessary structural reforms. Neither an abduction of reforms nor an attempt to railroad them through the legislatures or even the bureaucracy will yield the necessary growth momentum. Excuse me. The second necessary condition for the 1991 reforms was the significant amount of academic intellectual churning that preceded them. Throughout the 1980s, there was a constant battle of ideas between the liberalizers and the status quoists and regulators. The latter would employ the age old trick of creating a scare about India becoming a neo colony and the demise of domestic industrial capacities if the Indian industry was confronted with global competition. There were a number of studies undertaken by leading think tanks to refute this vicious argument on the basis of empirical evidence. Some major studies were also published to quantify the benefits that would potentially result from economic liberalization. For reforms to succeed in India, the intellectual battle has to be won in the public domain. With media explosion and greater openness and participation in public discourse, this is now even more essential than ever. It is a misplaced perception that reforms in India were or can be stealthily undertaken by ministers and bureaucrats acting covertly in the expectation that positive results that are expected to accrue from these reforms will suffice to convert the general public opinion in their favor. Given our vibrant and fiercely competitive democracy, reforms in India will be successful if and only if sufficient groundwork has been done in advance to mold the public opinion in their support. As we can see in the recent case of demonetization that occurred in December through November and December of the last year, we've seen that the immense popularity of the current Modi government is what is responsible for allowing the government to go ahead without the kind of groundwork that is actually needed to make the reform happen. Now, a lot of people question demonetization, and yet the Modi government won a landslide victory in the latest UP elections, which happened last month. The reason for this is the immense the immense popularity of the Modi government and what they've done over the last 3 years, ever since they've come to power, they've come up with policies, they've come up with a lot of groundwork, which is actually favorable for the general populace, and therefore, this one stroke was forgiven. This one stroke where things were not managed well, the demonetization, that was forgiven. Now, it is perhaps redundant after 25 years to argue that reforms cannot be imposed from abroad or by any group of externally oriented experts. India has traversed a long distance and appreciably reinforced its sovereign credentials. But it should also be recognized that even the 1991 reforms had a very large dose of indigenous inputs and were a result of rigorous research and active advocacy domestically. Researchers well versed in the Indian ground realities and its political economy presented these reform measures in a form readily comprehensible and acceptable to the political leadership, bureaucracy, and the political class in general. In the present context, it becomes even more critical to demonstrate that reforms are rooted in the Indian reality and are of Indian origin. And this is precisely why the Modi government is succeeding currently, because people who actually watch the reforms, who actually watch the steps being taken by this government, are able to see that they're of Indian origin and they're rooted in Indian reality. Thank you so much.